Homage to fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni. Homage to wisdom warrior Manjushri. Homage to lineage masters. The Dharma, profound and subtle, is rarely met in a million eons. Now we are able to hear, study and follow it. May we fully realize Tathagata's true meaning. In order to liberate all sentient beings from samsara, generate supreme bodhicitta. Next, let us all study together the contemplation of the sufferings of samsara in the preliminary practices. Among the 6 realms of samsara, we are now discussing the sufferings of the hell realm. Within the sufferings of the hell realm, we are specifically talking about the cold hells. Previously, we finished discussing the sufferings of the hot hells and the neighboring hells. Now we are talking about the sufferings of the cold hells. The main purpose of describing these hellish sufferings is to help our fourfold assembly of Dharma friends, on one hand, understand that in this world, apart from the places we can see with our naked eyes, there exist such extremely painful hells. We must understand the situation of the hell realms. At the same time, considering the negative karma we have accumulated in the past, it is very possible for us ourselves. The fact remains that we can never be entirely certain that we won't be reborn in a hell realm where we would have to endure unimaginable and intense suffering. Therefore, it is crucial for everyone to reflect on this matter. I wonder, will I ultimately fall into hell? If that is the case, then I must quickly repent, because it is truly hard to say when death will eventually come. I believe everyone really needs to seriously reflect on this point. Why have we come into this world? Many masters have mentioned in their elements of scriptures that we have fortunately obtained this precious human body, successfully encountered a genuine spiritual teacher, and gratefully received these profound and precious instructions. However, if we do not diligently put these teachings into practice and ultimately return to the bardo completely empty-handed, then, driven by the winds of your karma, you will have no choice but to fall into the 3 lower realms. If you truly fall into the hell-hungry ghost or animal realms, it is not as we imagine, it is extremely painful. So, based on the negative karma we have created and the virtuous deeds we have performed, from every perspective, no one can be completely confident. Right now, there are many people in the world who do not study Buddhism at all, and even among those who do, there are quite a few, but only a small number, truly and regularly contemplate the sufferings of hell and samsara, and feel a sense of fear in their hearts, constantly and everywhere being especially afraid of falling into lower realms themselves. How many practitioners like that are there? Both monastics and lay people should repeatedly reflect on this. How many people around you are like this? What did you do before you started studying Buddhism? After learning Buddhism, have you ever thought about these things? Is it worth thinking about? Should you think about it? So, for many people, we are not animals. It's not the case that as long as we have food and clothing and our lives are settled, that's enough. We still have to follow our karma into future lives. When we go to our future lives, we will be exactly the same as we are now. We will still fear suffering and be unwilling to accept all kinds of hardship. We will still wish to obtain happiness and joy. So, the question then is it truly worth it for us to take the necessary steps to protect ourselves at this very moment? Shouldn't we be making every possible effort to avoid this kind of especially long-lasting and profound suffering? This is precisely why engaging in a consistent spiritual practice is so genuinely important. Within that practice, you will find there are some very fundamental Buddhist principles that can be applied in our lives, and it is my personal belief that these principles are exceptionally important. Most people don't believe in Buddhism at all. They think hell doesn't exist. These people are very ignorant. In fact, there is quite a lot of solid evidence in Buddhism. To completely disregard all this evidence, these people are truly lost. If you refuse to acknowledge it without any reason, that is a kind of foolishness in this world. There are also some people who, although they admit the existence of hell and heavenly realms, but they seem very confident, thinking they themselves won't fall into it. It's as if hell is only for other people, as if it's just to scare children or to tell ordinary folks about. They think it has nothing to do with them, but in fact in this life or in our previous lives, it's important to realize there may still be many negative karmic seeds lying dormant and hidden deep within our store consciousness. When the conditions are right for these negative karmas to ripen, we will find we have no other choice but to properly endure the resulting suffering that follows. So for that reason, right now, while we still have this precious bit of time available to us, each of us should sincerely repent for our past misdeeds. Right now, we have encountered some very effective methods, such as the 100-syllable mantra, the Vajrasattva mantra, and various practices for purifying negative karma. We should all diligently practice these. At the same time, in the future, we should try our best, though we can't say 100%, because as ordinary people, our minds are still filled with many habitual tendencies, and also many fixed karmic results from our past lives are ripening. Because of this, none of us can be completely confident about the future. We can't claim that from now on we won't create even a single negative karma. But from this moment on, I must not be as careless as before. I have to be cautious. Otherwise, the karma I create will ultimately have to be borne by myself alone. So, when we talk about the sufferings of hell next, don't approach it like some worldly archaeologists or historians do. Scholars just learn about it, and that's enough. They think it doesn't apply to themselves. But we are practitioners. As practitioners, we need to examine every teaching within our own mind streams. Have I made this kind of mistake? Have I done this before? If I have, then in my next life will I be reborn in hell? If I am reborn in hell, let's take a look. Even now in big cities, when it's 40 or 50 degrees in the summer, everyone finds it unbearable. It's an especially painful situation. And because of this, we feel extremely distressed. Imagine, in the winter time, in places such as Tibet or the Northeast, where it's incredibly cold, let alone the idea of going outside in the dead of winter without any protective clothes on at all. Even just staying outside for a very short while feels completely unbearable. Even now, in autumn, when the weather is just a bit chilly, if we don't put on enough clothes, we feel especially cold. We often think, oh, what should I do? But actually here in the human world today, no matter what happens, there's always a way out. After all, as humans, we have options. But once you fall into hell, all sentient beings there live that kind of life. So what happens then? That's why, while we're still alive in the human world today, it's very possible that something unexpected could happen, and we might suddenly leave this world. Driven by your karma, you could fall straight into the cold hells or the hot hells. So what then? Therefore, when practicing, everyone should truly feel a sense of spine-chilling fear and dread. This shows that you have some experiential understanding of samsara in your practice. Otherwise, when talking about the merits of Sukhavati, it wouldn't matter to you at all. It would seem like it has nothing to do with you. And when describing the sufferings of hell, you wouldn't feel any fear or awe either. If you even feel happy about it, then there's definitely something wrong with your practice. Next, let's talk about the sufferings of the cold hells. Generally, everyone should be aware of the sufferings in the cold hells. In some treatises from the past, it is said that beneath the surface of Jambudvipa in this world, in Han regions like the Yogacarabhumi Shastra commentary, which should be included in the Taisho Tripitaka, it is specifically mentioned within the law that the cold hells are in fact located at a considerable depth of 33,000 units, far below the world's surface. The first cold hell, the blister hell, exists there, and further down from that. There is also a saying which describes that for every 2,000 yojanas, an ancient unit for measuring distance in India, the hells descend progressively, layer by layer, going further and deeper down. Furthermore, this concept is elaborated upon in the Abhidharmakosha Bhasya, a foundational philosophical treatise from the Buddhist tradition. This significant work was composed by the highly influential Indian master Vasubandhu. This scripture was later translated into Chinese by the famous Chinese Buddhist monk Tang Xuanzang. Within this text, it is described that the realms known as the cold hells are located in a place far outside the 4 great continents of the world, outside the iron-encircling mountains, in a world of darkness. The explanations given in various treatises are not the same. For example, in the Sutra of Mindfulness of the True Dharma and the Abhidharmakosha, these sutras and shastras state that there are 8 types of cold hells. According to foundational Buddhist scriptures like the Dirgha Agama Sutra and the Abhidharma of the Establishment of the World, there are detailed accounts mentioning the existence of 10 distinct types of cold hells. It is important to note, however, that while these sources are considered authoritative, other texts may present certain variations. In essence, when comparing these different accounts, the primary differences are generally found in some of the specific names used for the hells and in the classifications or numbers provided within these various texts. But in reality, when sentient beings commit extremely serious karma, they will inevitably fall into such cold hells. Therefore, because of this, one should first make an effort to truly understand what the conditions in the hell realms are actually like. Then, one must repeatedly contemplate these facts and practice the teachings accordingly. Generally speaking, the 8 cold hells are surrounded by central and peripheral snow mountains and glaciers. Everywhere fierce winds rage and blizzards swirl. The sentient beings residing in these hells, in such circumstances, in this realm, they suffer unbearably from the biting cold, left naked and exposed to the harsh elements. As a result of this extreme temperature, various painful blisters constantly form on their bodies, which is why the first of these places is called the blister hell. In certain places here, the winters are known to be especially cold. If you don't wear proper clothes and stay outside for even a short while in the winter, your body would begin to suffer the severe effects of the frost. It's said that you could potentially develop numerous uncomfortable blisters on your body. I recall a time when I traveled to the northeast, and many of the locals there specifically told me, "You absolutely have to wrap up well in your clothes, because if you fail to do so, you're going to get blisters." But the question is, will that actually happen? Well, it's certainly possible that it might. Sometimes winters in Tibet also feel especially cold. In the biography of Phyllis Armour, it is said that in Sikh Tibet, summer is like a heavenly realm, while winter is like a cold hell. That's how it was described, and it's the same for us in Seda. During the vibrant summer months, the majestic mountains are blanketed with a breathtaking variety of flowers. One could truly say it's comparable to a paradise here on earth. However, as the seasons turn and winter takes hold, especially around the much colder month of December, it really is extremely cold, and many fellow practitioners are especially afraid of it. I see that many of our fellow practitioners here have already started preparing now. They're buying clothes, renovating their houses, and making preparations in many ways. It's necessary. Because after all, we're human. If you keep enduring it when it gets extremely cold, it becomes quite difficult if you want to do anything. So the suffering in the human world really can't be compared. But after all, living in the human world, there are still some similarities in certain places. The first of these is called the blistering hell. Here, countless painful blisters gradually begin to form on the body. Over time, these blisters will burst open, eventually and inevitably forming deeply ulcerated wounds. And that is precisely why it is also called the ruptured blister hell. In some other scriptures, there are the hell of holes and the hell without holes. There are also the thick cloud hell and the cloudless hell. Various names and descriptions differ slightly. In the Sutra of the Causes and Conditions of the Child of Light, the names of the cold hells are listed. These names are basically the same as those mentioned in the preliminary practices and resting the mind in its nature. The second of these realms is known as the ruptured blister hell. In this place, the bodies of its inhabitants become covered in painful blisters, which then gradually and painfully split open, causing immense suffering. After this comes the third hell. The sentient beings in this place can hardly endure the profound torment from the extreme and unrelenting cold. As a result, they can't help but clench their teeth so tightly that they begin to chatter. Therefore, this domain is called the chattering teeth hell. In some other scriptures, it is referred to as the hell of shivering sounds. There are various descriptions. This is called the chattering teeth hell. The sentient beings in this realm suffer from such an extreme and bone-chilling cold that they are constantly crying out in agony. The sound of their suffering is said to resemble a chew, and this is precisely the reason it is called the Achu hell. In some sutras, this place is also referred to as the hell of suffering from cold sounds, further emphasizing the nature of the torment. Similarly, there is also the Huhupo hell, which is likewise named after the sounds of suffering made by those who dwell there. Many scriptures describe it differently, but in reality, they are referring to the same thing. We might say, "Achoo, it's so cold," when we feel a sudden chill. This reminds me of a story from an ancient scripture about a bhikshu, a Buddhist monk. This monk had successfully trained many disciples to become arhats, or enlightened ones. But after his own teacher passed away, due to negative karma he had created in a past life, he tragically fell into what is known as the cold hell. At that time he himself didn't even realize he had died. He said, "This room is so cold, ayoyo." In English, when we sneeze, we say achu achu. So, how do you represent that same sneezing sound in the Chinese language? Some might guess ayoyo, but no, that's incorrect. The expression ayoyo is what you would typically say when you're in pain or surprised. To find out the real answer, let's listen to what that teacher was saying inside the room. Achoo, this room is so cold, so cold. He kept saying this. At that moment, one of his disciples, an arhat, thought, "My teacher is truly remarkable. He probably went to some pure land." Then when he used his supernatural powers to observe, he eventually found his teacher, only to discover the man was already in hell. Incredibly, the teacher himself had no idea and just kept on saying, "This room is so very cold." He was extremely frightened. He thought, maybe I should quickly perform a Buddhist ritual to see what can be done. Then, in the very next moment, when he observed the situation again, because of the teacher's past merit from having taught so many dharmas, he had already been reborn in the heavenly realms. So the teacher himself didn't even know he had fallen into hell, which is actually quite fortunate. If some dharma friends or teachers fall into such a hell and don't even realize it themselves, so cold, but then they are immediately liberated. Was this spoken by the Choje, or is it from a certain sutra? The elder Mahadeva, right? Yes, I think that's correct. It is said that Elder Mahadeva was residing in a border region. After the Buddha's final passing, his parinirvana, it is believed the one who gathered the most followers was Elder Mahadeva. When teaching the important text, the Sakya aphorisms, this point is likely mentioned within the associated commentary. This reference is about the serious consequence of being reborn into the cold hells. However, I must admit that I don't remember the specifics very clearly, as my memory for these kinds of details isn't particularly great. The cries of sentient beings calling out from the cold have already ceased. At this point they can't even cry out anymore. All they can do is let out long, drawn-out sighs. This realm of torment is called the Kakava hell, and it is also known as the hell of suffering from cold cries. Here the skin of the sentient beings freezes completely solid and turns a ghastly shade of blue. Subsequently, their frozen skin tragically splits apart, breaking into 4 distinct sections. It is because of this gruesome spectacle that this place is also called the Hell of Splitting, like a blue lotus. The entire body of the sentient being splits into 4 parts. The flesh beneath the skin freezes red and splits into 8 sections. Previously it was split into 4 parts, now it splits into 8. Many scriptures describe it in a similar way. This type of hell is called the hell of splitting, like a red lotus, which is the 7th one. Even worse, the body freezes into a blackish red color and splits into 16 or even 32 parts, or the entire body splits into countless pieces, hence it is called the Great Lotus Hell. This is also mentioned in many sutras and shastras, especially those individuals who slander the sacred and holy teachings, or who go so far as to defame certain revered saints. They will inevitably fall into the terrifying place known as the Great Lotus Hell. The sentient beings who end up in this hell, within their frozen and split wounds, countless iron-beaked insects crawl in and bite them. These iron-mouthed insects gnaw at the countless wounds of the beings. At the same time, they also suffer from the torment of freezing cold, because there are 8 completely different kinds of suffering. They are given 8 distinct names. Collectively, these are known as the 8 cold hells. Now, when we delve into the primary reasons for an unfortunate rebirth within the terrifying realms known as the 8 cold hells, there are certain sacred scriptures and ancient texts that provide a detailed explanation, which is as follows. If you cause other sentient beings to suffer and freeze to death in cold ice or water, then as a direct karmic consequence, it is said you will be reborn in the hell realms. And I can't help but notice that in our big cities today, there are many fish and shrimp being kept alive on ice before being sold. They use various machines to haul them all out of the sea. And then, to preserve their ultimate freshness, they are carefully stored within enormous industrial-grade freezers. This is understandable, as in modern times a significantly large and growing number of people are choosing to reside along the coast. Sometimes when we find ourselves traveling by sea and taking a boat, for example, I remember when Choje and we went on a pilgrimage to the sacred Mount Puto in the past, On that vessel, there were also a truly staggering number of fish, all frozen completely solid inside enormous industrial-grade freezers. When I think about this, it seems to me that for the people who operate these powerful freezing machines, for every single one of them, this line of work is definitely creating what could be ironically called the very best and most direct karmic cause for being reborn into the unimaginable suffering of the cold hells in the future. I think in the Han regions, creating such negative karma is extremely common. It is also stated in some scriptures that for those individuals who commit the cruel act of stripping sentient beings of their clothing and then heartlessly leave them to suffer and freeze in the bitter cold, these people will, as a direct consequence, also fall into the terrifying realm known as the cold hell. To provide a specific example of this, within the collection of teachings called the Six Kadampa Texts, there is a particular work known as the Jataka, and this Jataka text says the following. It is taught that individuals who hold nihilistic perspectives in this life will consequently find themselves dwelling in an existence characterized by biting cold winds and pervasive darkness throughout their subsequent lives. Furthermore, this specific teaching is also referenced within the important text, The Stages of the Path to Enlightenment. The meaning is that if someone holds nihilistic views, that is, believing that cause and effect do not exist and that past and future lives do not exist, such a person will fall into the dark cold hell in the future and experience immeasurable and boundless suffering. This is explained in the Jataka. The Jataka was composed by the great master Arya Sura and is especially valued by the Kadampa tradition. In particular, Venerable Patoa placed great emphasis on the six Kadampa texts. These include the foundational text known as the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, the Ornament of Sutras, and the Compendium of Training. In addition to these, the list also covers the Dhammapada collection, the Bodhisattva levels, and the collection of stories called the Jataka. There are also different accounts regarding the Jataka. The first part is said to be composed by Arya Sura, while the latter part is attributed to Arya Deva and others. In any case, the Kadampa tradition places special emphasis on these treatises. After studying these treatises, one should have no doubts regarding the correct view of cause and effect. Therefore, in the past, Guru Rinpoche also especially praised this tradition of theirs. As I mentioned, falling into the cold hells, one cause is holding nihilistic views. Especially nowadays, many atheistic viewpoints truly do cause countless sentient beings to fall into the cold hells. These can be considered fundamental causes. If I say this, perhaps some of you who are here with us today, those of you who are teachers, and also some who have in the past specialized in their academic work as respected professors of materialism, have had a profound and lasting influence on tens of thousands of people. They say that cause and effect do not exist, that reincarnation does not exist, that heaven does not exist. Using this approach across the board, they destroy the virtuous roots in others' mental streams. This is also a cause for falling into the cold hells. In addition to other factors, another primary cause that leads to rebirth in the intense suffering of the cold hells is the deeply unwholesome act of slandering the noble ones, a point that was briefly touched upon earlier. As a clear illustration of this, the case of Bhikshu Kokalika is well documented within the sutras. It is also worth noting that the ancient scripture, the treatise on the establishment of the world Abhidharma, contains a section that specifically discusses the monk known as Bhikshu Kokalika. The monk known as Bhikshu Kokalika was in fact a disciple of Devadatta. The monk Bhikshu Kokalika, due to his slanderous speech, ultimately fell into the Padma hell. As we have discussed, the realm known as Padma hell is the Great Lotus Hell. This name originates from the ancient language of Sanskrit, where the word Padma translates to lotus. He slandered the great Shravakas, Shariputra, and Maudgalyayana. The precise meaning, it should be noted, is not actually explained in very much detail within the Abhidharma treatise. It is mainly in the important Buddhist text, the Mahaprajaparamita Shastra, that the explanation is provided in a more lucid and comprehensive way. The monk named Bhikshu Kokalika, as a result of his actions, eventually fell into the terrible Great Lotus Hell. What was the reason? It's because he maliciously slandered the great Shravakas. You might ask, who were these great Shravakas that were mentioned? They were none other than Maudgalyayana and Shariputra, who were known as the two most prominent disciples of the Buddha. And what was the reason that this person slandered them in such a way? The text explains that it was because he had unfortunately fallen under the negative and misguided influence of Devadatta. Kokalika on many occasions found himself feeling a great deal of jealousy, and he also consistently harbored fundamentally incorrect views in regard to the specific words and all the actions of these two particularly noble individuals. On one occasion, after the Buddha's two great chief disciples, Maudgalyayana and Shariputra, had successfully completed their annual rains retreat, a time dedicated to intensive study and meditation, they decided to travel once more. Together, they embarked on a journey, setting out to wander through the various lands in order to continue their spiritual mission. While they were traveling on the road, they unexpectedly encountered a severe and heavy rainstorm, which compelled them to find shelter. They ended up spending the night at the house of a local potter. What they were completely unaware of, however, was the fact that there was also a woman present inside the house. Later on, while she was deep in a dream, this woman found that a sense of desire began to arise within her, leading her to have what could be described as impure thoughts. On the following day, when the woman went to the river for her bath, Kokalika, who had been eagerly awaiting this opportunity, finally noticed her. He immediately approached her and began to question her with great intensity, asking, "Tell me, where did you stay? I must know, where did you sleep last night, and what were you doing?" She replied, "I stayed in the same place as the two monks." It was at this very moment that the Buddha's two great disciples, Maudgalyayana and Shariputra, were seen emerging from the local potter's house. After witnessing this, the monk known as Bhikshu Kokalika went around and began publicly slandering them throughout the entire monastic community, the Sangha. He maliciously claimed those two esteemed monks were just seen with the woman from the potter's house. He slandered them, claiming they had an impure relationship and so on. Later, many monks tried to advise him and stop him from slandering, because it was absolutely impossible for those two to have done such a thing. But he insisted, saying, "I saw it with my own eyes," and continued to slander them. Even the Buddha himself later personally advised him not to slander. There are some beings, when their karmic retribution manifests, truly, if they are determined to fall into hell themselves, not to mention other beings. Even the Buddha personally advised Bhikkhu Kokalika, but he refused and continued to speak that way. Later, the Buddha also said there was nothing more to be done and could only let him fall into hell. And indeed, he did fall into hell. The entire situation of his descent into hell, in front of the entire assembly of monks and all of his followers, the Buddha explained the situation in great detail. He described the specific kinds of suffering that were experienced after one has fallen into the great lotus hell. Additionally, the lifespans within the 8 distinct cold hells were also described with thorough detail. If you are interested in learning more about this topic, you should refer to Volume 13 of the Mahaprajnaparamita Shastra, which provides a considerably detailed explanation of the entire situation and conditions of the cold hells. Here in our discussion, we have already covered and explained the primary causes and contributing factors that lead to rebirth in the cold hells. One is holding nihilistic views, and another is slandering. There is also causing sentient beings to die in the process of extreme cold. In the Han cultural regions, there is also a significant text known as the Jinglu Yi Xiang. Furthermore, this text was also a subject of detailed discussion within the important compilations by the scholar Bao Chang and his contemporaries in the past. If one slanders the noble ones, one will fall into the cold hells. So slandering noble beings like Maudgalyayana and Shariputra, as mentioned earlier, will definitely lead to falling into the cold hells as well. Also, as stated in the aspiration prayer for rebirth in Sukhavati in our daily lives, those who have truly generated the initial bodhicitta and are practicing bodhicitta, such individuals can also be called noble ones. In the way of the bodhisattva, they are also referred to as noble ones. From the very moment bodhicitta arises in one's heart, that person can be called a noble one, a child of the Buddha. A child of the Buddha can certainly be called a noble one. In Tibetan, the words for child of the Buddha and noble one sound almost the same. Therefore, we should try our best not to slander anyone. Even if you really do discover something about someone, if there is no special necessity, for example, if you are truly a monastic official or steward, and for the sake of maintaining the purity of the monastic discipline and for various other reasons, you have no choice but to speak out. Apart from such cases, as I have mentioned before when explaining other treatises, people often say, seeing is believing. But sometimes, even our eyes are influenced by various workings of the mind, and in the end, it is possible for our vision to become confused, leading us to create negative karma. It is very easy for things to turn out this way. And so for this very reason, a number of sacred scriptures make a point to repeatedly emphasize that if the mind is pure, the body is pure, and speech is pure. If body, speech, and mind can be purified, then living in this world, in this very life, is truly meaningful. Nowadays, many lay practitioners, some people, seem to always be talking about the faults of others. But in fact, we are not qualified at all to point out others' faults. If we talk too much about the faults of others, and if the other person is truly an ordinary person, then what you say may be absolutely true. I think from a worldly perspective, there's nothing wrong with that. But if the other person is actually a manifestation of a saint, many manifestations of saints appear outwardly to be eccentric or even crazy. There have been quite a few like this since ancient times. So sometimes we really should be mindful of this. Otherwise, a seemingly simple conversation you have for just a short while, or even just a few brief words you say, might eventually lead to significant consequences for you far into the future that unfold over millions of years. To fall into the cold hells and suffer immeasurable pain, which is truly not worth it. So in this regard, I hope everyone will really reflect deeply on this. Ultimately, in this world, what kind of life is truly meaningful for us to live? In our contemporary world, a significant number of individuals across the globe have not yet come to fully comprehend the profound and intrinsic value that life itself holds. Most people think that as long as their family is happy, and for them having basic necessities like money, food and clothing is considered to be enough. But the reality of the situation is that this is actually not the case. This kind of thinking, not to mention humans, even ants have it. Ants also want to build their nests well and have a steady supply of food and a safe shelter. Well, as a matter of fact, ants do not actually wear any kind of clothing whatsoever, so that was clearly a mistake on my part. Their primary focus is on acquiring food and drink for survival, with no apparent need for clothing. However, despite this, it could be argued that ants are actually quite well dressed. To better understand their navigational abilities, scientists have conducted experiments where young ants are fitted with tiny stilts, which function like high heels, to test the hypothesis that they navigate by counting their steps. I see many of the lay practitioners here are nodding their heads in understanding. It seems they must have encountered this concept before as well. Following this, let's now turn our attention to discussing the lifespan of beings in the cold hells. So the question becomes, what is the specific measure used to describe their lifespan? To illustrate this, I want you to imagine a very large basin, one that has the capacity to hold 200 bushels, and it is completely filled to the top with countless tiny sesame seeds. Every 100 years in the blister hell, you take out one sesame seed from it. The lifespan for beings who are reborn in the agonizingly cold realm known as the blister hell is so extraordinarily long that it only concludes after a specific condition is met, when every single sesame seed has been painstakingly removed from a massive container. As some of you might recall, we have actually discussed this very concept before when we were examining the foundational Buddhist text, the Abhidharmakosha. To illustrate the immense length of time involved, the teaching presents a powerful analogy. Imagine a vast container filled with sesame seeds. If you were to remove just one single seed from it every 100 years, the total time it would take until the container is completely empty is the lifespan in the blister hell. And this is just one of the hells. The lifespans in the others are said to gradually become 20 times longer. This specific teaching, offering such a profound perspective on time, is also found within the Buddhist text, the Abhidharmakosha. It seems that in resting the nature of mind, it quotes the Sutra of Mindfulness of the True Dharma, saying that in Magadha there is an especially large container filled with sesame seeds. If you take out one sesame seed every 100 years and gradually, little by little, use up all the sesame seeds, then at that time the lifespan in the blister hell will be completely exhausted. This is without a doubt an innumerable number of years, representing an incredibly long period of time. For beings in the other hells, their lifespans are also subject to a dramatic increase, multiplying by 20 each time. Therefore, from top to bottom, the lifespans become progressively longer, and as a consequence, the suffering they endure grows much more intense. In other words, the lifespan in the cracked blister hell is 20 times that of the blister hell, and the lifespan in the clenched teeth hell is also 20 times that of the cracked blister hell. If you continue this pattern, then by the time you reach the Great Lotus Hell, its lifespan is also extremely long. Next, we should proceed as before and contemplate the suffering of the cold hells in relation to our own mental continuum. So, how should we contemplate this particular idea? First, we ought to consider the fundamental fact that, as human beings, especially during the harsh conditions of the winter season, If our bodies were left completely naked and exposed to the outside elements, even for just a brief moment in time, we would still find ourselves unable to endure the intense pain brought on by the freezing cold. This is something many of us have personally experienced, and in the past, some teachers have even practiced this themselves. In winter, they would go to extremely cold places and begin their practice either without clothes or with very little clothing to see how they felt, and when it truly became unbearable, they would think, what will I do if I fall into the cold hells in the future? This is how we should reflect. Or we can imagine that we are personally already suffering in the cold hells right now. Or we can think, this time I haven't actually fallen into the cold hells, but the karma I have accumulated from beginningless time until now is indeed such that in the future there are so many causes for falling into hell that I have created, and I can't be sure that I won't fall in, so what should I do now? Reflect on this over and over again, and then think again, just like with the hot hells before. Oh, right now I haven't actually fallen into hell. If I repent now, it's still not too late. Whether it's a qualified teacher or the precious Dharma, and also being reborn in this land of karma, Jambudvipa, I should take this opportunity to sincerely repent and then begin from now on to avoid falling into such hells. I must repent. On one hand, I repent myself, and on the other hand, if we can't even bear this small amount of cold right now, those who have been our mothers since beginningless time, even though some of them are not our parents in this life, but many of my relatives and friends, as well as countless sentient beings, have also created such terrifying karma. They are surely now in the cold hells. So for them as well, I give rise to an especially strong sense of compassion. I begin to close my eyes and meditate. Actually, the practice in the great perfection resting the mind threefold guidance corresponds to each practice here, which might be a bit better. But for the sake of everyone practicing together as we did before, the practices in preliminary practices do not correspond directly to those here. If it is convenient for you, it is best to integrate each practice from resting the mind with preliminary practices. This way, it may be more convenient, or you can also practice them separately if you prefer. In any case, we must practice. Practice is very important. As you will come to find out, what you do in practice and what you learn in theory are indeed completely different. Theory is just, talking about how there is a cold hell in words. If you have never visualized it, you won't be able to feel it yourself. But now, after you actually contemplate each guided practice, at a certain point you realize, this is not just empty talk in theory. It really is that after I die, I could be reborn in these places. You have to truly be able to feel this yourself, and at that time, you might feel very afraid during the day, and even have frightening dreams at night. The night before last, I dreamed that I had fallen into the realm of hungry ghosts, and I was extremely frightened. Really, after I woke up, I thought, maybe it's the karma I've created in this life, or perhaps in past lives, and maybe in my next life, I'll first fall into the realm of hungry ghosts. Maybe it's a sign or something. It feels like my karma can't be changed, even though I keep trying to find ways to change it. But in the end, there was nothing I could do. I could only go into the realm of hungry ghosts. And then I was especially scared, but there was nothing I could do. Even after I woke up, my heart was still pounding, but there was nothing I could do. These past few days, I've still been a bit scared, reciting the Vajrasattva mantra every day. But it might not necessarily change anything. It's true, as humans, sometimes through dreams we can reflect on many things in our current life. On one hand, I feel that living in this world really is lacking in real meaning in many ways. It's just like being in a dream. Although people place great importance on fame and gain right in front of them, after we die, there is still an extremely long time ahead to experience the various results of our karma.
And our lifespan in this world is especially short. When we die, it's as if we've entered a completely different world. It's impossible for everyone to end up in a place with blue skies, white clouds above, and green grass below. Not every sentient being is reborn in such a place. So sometimes when you think about it, karma really is terrifying. But there's nothing we can do. Every sentient being has to face birth, aging, sickness, and death. Even if you're a president of a country or the Secretary General of the United Nations, it's the same. Even we, as insignificant sentient beings, must face birth, aging, sickness, and death. In the face of this, the only thing we can do is to sincerely repent and practice the Dharma now. Practicing the Dharma will always stay with us and bring us happiness. Other than this, there really is no other way. Not even your friends and family can save you. A lot of wealth and status, these can't save you either. So, in the pith instructions of many masters, at the time of death, the only thing you can truly rely on is the Dharma. Those who have never practiced may not necessarily be able to feel this, But if you practice over a long period, in the end, you will be able to feel it. Many of the actions of lineage masters can also be seen as evidence of this. So, some of the meaningless things in front of us, if we keep busy with them all the time, it really isn't good. That's why sometimes when I see some worldly people, especially some people living in big cities, in fact, they have no choice but to face life this way, with a lot of pressure and heavy burdens. There's no way around it. They have no choice but to face it. But if there isn't even a bit of dharma in their hearts, it's especially pitiful. It's truly pitiful, but there's nothing that can be done. Some people don't study Buddhism at all, and some, even though they do, it's entirely just for appearances, completely superficial. The teachings of the Dharma have not really penetrated into their hearts in any meaningful way. They are, for the most part, just muddling through, putting on an external performance, and that is the extent of it. So, moving forward, those of us here really need to reflect on this. If you don't reflect on this, then just practicing superficially is useless. You must truly cultivate. On one hand, what will you do if you yourself are reborn in hell? And those beings who are already being reborn in hell are truly pitiful. How could they possibly endure such suffering? For the negative karma in our own mental continuum, we must confess past misdeeds and refrain from future ones. And we should give rise to great compassion for those beings who have already fallen into hell. As before, we should be complete in the preliminary practices, main and concluding practices. This was already explained earlier. We should engage in the preliminary practices, main and concluding practices to cultivate properly. Moving on, let's now turn our attention to a particular realm known as the solitary hell. A unique and defining characteristic of this place is that its physical location is not set in a single specific area. It is considered to be entirely unfixed. Furthermore, the type of suffering that is experienced within this hell is not static or predictable, but is instead in a continuous state of flux and transformation. Regarding the origin of its name, there is a theory put forth by some scholars which suggests that the solitary hell is so named because the beings in this hell are completely alone, which is why it is called the solitary hell. However, this explanation is not accepted by Longchen Rabjam. In some solitary hells there are 500 monks experiencing suffering. Therefore, it is unreasonable to designate it as a solitary hell simply because the number is small. I have a distinct recollection that this is mentioned in the book Resting the Nature of Mind. I'm trying to place it, but could you remind me when exactly we discussed this before? In 2004, is that right? No, it was 2002. I have a slight recollection of this. The beings in the isolated hells, some are trapped between mountain rocks, some are confined within solid stone, and some are frozen inside blocks of ice. This situation varies greatly depending on their individual karmic conditions and circumstances. Some are even boiled in scalding water, and some are burned in fire, and so on. There are all sorts of situations. Indeed, a significant amount of modern scientific research has begun to provide compelling evidence that supports this idea. For instance, consider the groundbreaking work of the American biologist Cleve Baxter. He conducted experiments suggesting that even plants, which we often perceive as simple life forms, could demonstrate a form of primary perception, reacting to human thoughts and intentions. I think I referenced him in Buddhist science. He elaborated that even plants are now being found to possess what could be described as emotions and certain distinct sensations. Therefore, it is quite possible that after many more years of extensive research and detailed investigation, our understanding of the world around us will be profoundly different. They have more or less come to feel this way. Actually, in point of fact, according to what is recorded within the sacred Buddhist scriptures provided to us, many beings in the solitary hells experience all sorts of situations. The Vinaya Sutra also speaks of this. Like Maudgalyayana Arhat, he looked around and saw a great many stones, numerous pieces of wood, and all sorts of other seemingly inanimate objects. He then perceived that all of these things, which should have been without feeling, actually possessed life and were capable of feeling pain, and so he said with a voice full of great sorrow, "There is no happiness in the three realms, beings in the solitary hells." The three realms refers to the three worlds. There is no happiness in the three realms, beings in the solitary hells. They are relentlessly tormented by a deep and profound suffering, making their existence feel as if they are perpetually living within a great blazing fire. This agonizing state is just like being trapped inside a deep pit of intensely scorching flames from which there is no escape. At that time, this was also described in the Buddhist scriptures. So the beings in the solitary hells are also extremely miserable and pitiable. In a great many various and different places, all sorts of truly unusual situations can manifest themselves. For instance, some people find themselves completely trapped between towering rocky mountains. This actually reminds me, there used to be a wonderful book that was called The Wonders of Nature. And I really do think that I bought a copy of this particular book for myself a very, very long time ago. In the historical records, people of that era considered this particular event to be a phenomenon of exceptional rarity. This is because a notable stone is situated precisely on the border that separates France from a neighboring nation, and this very same rock is known to frequently emit a loud, distinct sound that strongly resembles a human cry. So they consequently began to call it the Weeping Rock. From somewhere deep inside, the distinct sound of a woman's voice suddenly emanates, a truly and exceptionally piercing, high-pitched scream. A woman's cry is generally known to be especially shrill. Of course, I'm just kidding with all of you, because in reality, you are all what are known as dakinis. It's also worth noting that if you go back to the year 1997, there was a news report that was published which covered this very topic. Located deep within a forest in the country of Myanmar, there was also a particularly large rock. This peculiar rock would also mysteriously emit the sorrowful sound of crying. This was especially noticeable when the weather conditions became particularly bad. For example, during periods of very heavy, pouring rains, it would make these awful crying sounds, and they were unquestionably a result of its pain. Sometimes I think, now that we are building the Grand Nunnery Dharma Hall, when it rains I feel very sad inside. During the rainy season, when the weather is bad, I feel very sad. I wonder if after dying one might be reborn as something like that. Maybe even as a stone that cries during the rainy season. It's hard to say. Truly, sometimes the karmic results of sentient beings are beyond imagination. It might even be related to the natural world. It's hard to say if one could become such a being. So, there are indeed some sentient beings who become rocks. There are also some that are trapped inside boulders. The story of Tangtong Gyalpo below is also like this. In a 2006 news report from Shandong, there was a stonemason with the surname Li. This skilled artisan often used stones as his primary material, crafting all kinds of wonderful things. Then, on one occasion, after splitting open a particularly large boulder, he found that there was not a single gap or fissure inside the solid rock. It was completely seamless, but incredibly, nestled deep within it, were two mysterious insects. I think there was a photo of this before, two insects inside the stone. Based on our current understanding from the established field of normal biology and many other related sciences as well, there wasn't a single crack inside the stone, so it's impossible for anything to survive. But these two insects were living quite well. That stonemason thought, as mentioned in the Compendium of Materia Medica, the insects found inside stones are called stone shrimp insects. Stone shrimp insects are valuable and can treat eye diseases, so he started hiding them. But later, the medical, scientific, and biological communities, they conducted research using various methods. But the result remained a mystery. They couldn't reach any conclusions. Of course, it's impossible to draw a conclusion. Sentient beings' karma is truly unfathomable. When the Choje went to Canada, he also found many stones by the seaside at that time. The local people have said that if you were to open them up, there is still some form of life inside. They said that when these stones are placed somewhere, they gradually start to move. There are many such stones. Once the scenery was especially beautiful there. At that time, the Choje had many of them. The locals could tell that some of the stones had different shapes. They said these stones could move slowly and gradually. If you put them in one place, they will slowly start to roll. And they also believed that there was life inside them. But as for what kind of life exactly, no one could say for sure. So indeed, the karma of sentient beings is truly inconceivable. Some of them are inside the ice here. Some fish in Tibet are frozen stiff in the ice during winter, but in summer they come back to life. There are even some that are boiled in boiling water. This is mentioned in Rongzom Pandita's Entering the Mahayana and other treatises. There are fire mice living in fire, even when we are boiling water at 100 degrees Celsius. There are still many sentient beings inside that are not harmed by the heat. Some sentient beings hide inside trees, and when woodcutters chop down the trees, their bodies are cut into pieces by countless blades, enduring immense suffering in their immediate aggregates. There are also some who are reborn as objects frequently used by people, such as pestles and mortars, brooms, clay pots, doors, pillars, stove stones, ropes, and so on. These are what Modgalyayana saw, and all of this is recorded in the scriptures. The doors and brooms we use in daily life may appear to be inanimate objects on the surface, but in reality, some sentient beings have turned into these things and experience intense suffering. Whenever people use them, they feel especially tormented. Of course, not every broom is a lonely hell being, but some sentient beings do become like this. That's the point. Otherwise, you might be too scared to open the door when you leave later. So for the hell beings, it is also the case that they experience these kinds of intense sufferings, and this entire experience happens for them through the faculty of the aggregate of consciousness. For example, the great accomplished master Drupchen Longchen Rabjam once saw a giant fish in Yamdruk Lake, and the great master Thangtong Gyalpo saw a frog inside a rock, among other things. Let me recount these two stories below. Regarding the origin of Yamdruk Lake, there is a popular local legend. The story says that long ago, the Dakini Yeshe Tsogyal was engaged in spiritual practice in this very area. During that time, a practitioner of the Bon religion came and threw a coin toward her. However, it's worth noting that an alternative version of the tale claims it was not just one coin, but actually 7 gold coins. Back then, Yamdruk Lake was not as long as it is now. It was divided into several sections, and in the summer there were many kinds of fish in the lake. But in winter, many of them would die. While she was diligently undertaking her spiritual practice, it was so that each and every sentient being would be able to survive. She tossed the coin into the air and made a vow. As a result, the lake became one long stretch, with all the sections joined together. There is also this version of the story. Some historical records say that before Yeshe Tsogyal, the Dakini, arrived, the lake had already formed. This is another version as well. People in Lhasa say that there seems to be another story about a wealthy family who had a servant named Dawa. There was this one time when Dawa actually managed to save a very small goldfish. The goldfish was moved in the end and transformed into a dragon maiden. She gave him a Chetsun Nyingtik. When the wealthy man saw that Dawa had received the Chetsun Nyingtik, he demanded that Dawa hand over the beautiful woman. At first, Dawa was unwilling, but they ignored his protest and later took him away. They brought him to a spring and without hesitation threw him into the water and drowned him. Following this cruel act, the dragon maiden emerged from the spring, and as a consequence, all manner of terrible floods began to ravage the land. She flooded all the wealthy people, and then this place became Yamdruk Lake. There is also such a saying, "This is from the people of Lhasa." Are there any people from Lhasa here? People from Lhasa also have this version of the story. Back when the Choje Chetsun Nyingtik went to India, at that time it was about 100 kilometers from Lhasa to there. To the border of Nepal, it was over 800 kilometers. When the revered Choje finally arrived at that sacred destination, he then began to recite some important scriptures. At that same time, he also spoke to those gathered about the well-known story that is mentioned within the preliminary practices. This particular location is situated near one of the 4 great and sacred lakes of Tibet. These lakes are the celestial Namtso Lake, the holy Mapamyumko, the vast Qinghai Lake, and the revered Yamdruk Lake. Indeed, the 4 great lakes each have their own unique and special qualities. Buddhism has its own stories about them, and among the Tibetan people there are also many different and fascinating folk tales. The source of this lake originates from Delong Gangchin, and its end flows into Zemagela. In between, it passes through a particularly long stretch, taking several days to traverse. Once, the great accomplished master Drukun Longchenpa, there are more stories about him later, he attained realization on the 7th day of the 7th month after 7 years, a truly remarkable master. While he was observing the lake, he suddenly began to weep and said this, "Oh, please, never use faith offerings for personal enjoyment. Never use faith offerings for personal enjoyment." The disciples, confused, asked, "Master, what exactly happened?" The master replied sorrowfully, "In this entire lake, there is the reincarnation of a master who misused offerings of faith." His consciousness was reborn as a giant fish in the solitary hell. In fact, among animals, some are actually from the solitary hells. They may appear to be animals, but in reality, they are beings from the solitary hell. It is experiencing immense suffering. The disciples asked the Master to reveal it to them. So the Master displayed his miraculous powers and in an instant made the entire lake dry up without a single drop of water left. At that moment, an enormous whale appeared before their eyes. Its massive body stretched across the entire lake. Countless living creatures were swarming all over its body, fighting to devour it. It was in unbearable pain, rolling all over the ground. It is extraordinarily long, and according to current descriptions, it is said to span more than 200 kilometers in total length. The entire area covers 678 square kilometers. It's an exceptionally large lake. Perhaps many people here have been there, right? Aren't you always going to Lhasa, carrying a camera and taking pictures every day? When I went there before, the first thing I did was, because the lake is so beautiful, the first thing I did was take a camera and start taking pictures. Later, when the Choje arrived in India, he said to me, "What are you people really doing, always carrying a camera and taking pictures every single day?" He explained that when you arrive at a sacred place, you should really make your aspirations the main focus of your visit. And so, ever since that day, I honestly haven't dared to take my camera out. Have you ever been to a place like that? I know you've been there before. Can you tell me, is it truly beautiful? Yes, it is indeed a very beautiful place. Now, what about everyone else here? I'm specifically asking the lay practitioners who are present, because as for the monastics, I imagine you probably haven't had the opportunity to go there. Have you ever had the chance to visit the truly magnificent Yamdrok Lake? That is precisely how the situation was at that particular point in time. Unfortunately, it seems we are completely out of time for our discussion today. Just then, a curious disciple stepped forward and asked a very profound question. Who exactly is the reincarnation of the one who is destined to bear the karmic results? The Master began to explain. This is the reincarnation of the Black Horse Lama from Western Tibet. What was that Black Horse Lama from Western Tibet like? His mantra power and blessings were truly extraordinary, not something ordinary. For people possessed by spirits, or for the sick and so on, just a single glance from him would have an immediate effect. He became a well-known recipient of offerings throughout the 4 regions of Western and Central Tibet. That person was definitely very famous. Otherwise, like some great masters who are more famous in Lhasa, we in Kham and Amdo would not know about them. We in Kham and Amdo might not know about them. Some are very famous in Qinghai, but people in Kham might not know them. In the past, it was even harder to find out about such things. But this Black Horse Lama was known throughout all 4 regions of Tibet. Ali, Utsang, Amdo and Kham, these are called the 4 wings of Tibet. He was a master who was famous everywhere, known by all. When he performed rituals to liberate the deceased, he would just recite a single pade, and people would start offering him large numbers of cattle, horses, and other livestock. After he died, he was reborn as this big fish. At that time, he must have received a great deal of offerings from the faithful. That's why many lamas accept offerings from the families of the deceased. But if they don't perform the liberation rituals properly, they may end up like this as well. Even nowadays, sometimes as lamas, even if you are very famous at the time, if you don't perform the liberation rituals properly, the material wealth and possessions left behind by the deceased can become a source of attachment, which is spiritually even more frightening. Therefore, as dedicated monastics, it is our solemn responsibility to perform the proper and necessary liberation rituals whenever these specific situations are encountered. If some deceased person makes offerings to you, therefore, you should diligently try your very best to use these resources for supporting the 3 jewels, which are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, or for other truly meaningful and beneficial purposes. It is crucial to remember that it should never be used for any improper purposes, as the resulting karmic consequences would be significantly more terrifying. Alright, let's stop here for today.
Om